Welcome to the Neophyte in the Woods podcast with Andrew McDowell.
Welcome to another episode of the Neophyte in the Woods podcast, a proud member of the Change Your POV podcast network. Today, we have a little bit of a change in direction from some of the stuff we've done recently. We're going to be talking about what General George S. Patton, who I think we can all agree knew a little something about fighting, called the greatest battle implement ever devised, the M1 Garand. But I'm not doing it alone because hearing me talk about this gun by myself would get really boring really fast. So
it's not going to be much more interesting when two of us are talking about it, to be honest with you.
Well, you know,
I'm just kidding.
I know.
I have problems with the Patton thing. I'm just letting you know. You do that on purpose. You know I don't like Patton.
I was unaware of your dislike of General Patton.
Are you serious?
Yeah, no idea.
Oh, we'll have to. Well, I'll let you finish introducing me.
Right.
Then I'll tell you why Patton was a poor choice.
So the voice you heard on the other end of this is my good buddy Jeff Adamec, as usual, here to help me through the terminology and gun stuff surrounding these topics. So Jeff, welcome back to the show.
Hey, buddy. So here's a terminology you need to learn up front. Patton was a friggin' asshole. He might have been a great infantry combat leader, get him out there, but the dude was a maniac. The dude had friggin' warped opinion. The dude thought he was a friggin' Roman legion, for Christ's sakes.
He did believe in reincarnation. Yep.
And I'm not saying that believing in reincarnation is one thing, but actually telling the Joint Chiefs of Staff that you are a Roman legion. I don't know what's crazier, that or the fact that they promoted him after that.
Man, he could fight, though. You can't...
He could read. He could read, and he could yell. He was an infantry leader, right?
And
an infantry leader he read every single book. He was very smart. I'll give him that. Very smart, very hard-lined, very good for America in the war. But much like MacArthur, he never would have worked out afterwards.
Oh no, I mean he was absolutely a product of his times, and I think his approach definitely fit more the First World War in terms of the approach that leadership had towards the common soldier, for lack of a better term. But
right,
you know,
I'll give you another thing. I refuse to look up his history of beyond World War II, like before that, because I don't want to hear that he was actually a frontline foot soldier. Because it would make it worse how he treated the guys who had PTSD.
Oh no, absolutely. He was a shitheel when it came to that stuff. But
right.
You know.
I mean, how many guys friggin' did he? I mean, the one guy that he got made to apologize to was bad enough.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think that the guy was a great breaking case of war. He didn't save the airborne in the Ardennes. He kind of was on his own little thing. The Nazis were afraid of him. Rommel respected him, and ultimately, I think the Soviets had him killed.
Wow. Okay, so we had a little conspiracy theory. I think that's
not a conspiracy theory. It's out in the open. It's actually the government never decided whether or not it was an accident or whether or not there was evidence that had to do with stuff, and the CIA got involved, and that was the end of it.
Okay.
So if they get involved during the Cold War, you kind of have to assume. And also, why wouldn't you had MacArthur on one side of the world, Patton on the other, the two biggest haters of communism. One of them was going to get. I mean, MacArthur killed himself off with his "I'm going to go right into China" thing.
That worked out really well for everybody.
Patton wasn't going to be controlled though, so there's very good evidence that Patton was actually
murdered.
Murdered. Yeah.
Interesting. Will Bill O'Reilly do a book killing Patton if he hasn't already?
No, he already did.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah, he's just like with the Kennedy thing. He debunks it, but the bottom line is that there's no evidence to say that it didn't happen, and because of where he was at, and because of the situation and his vocally anti-communist views, it's not above the communist Soviet intel guys to off a dude who was a threat to them.
Yep.
They killed a reporter after the Soviet Union just a couple of years ago. I'm just saying.
Yeah, they just tried to kill a dissident too, or a spy. So
conspiracy theory is like lizard people. Patton being maybe a murderer is not. It's a undisclosed option.
Okay.
So that's the way I look at it.
Well,
also, since the CIA invented the term conspiracy theory, anytime someone uses it, I always think that they're on the friggin' take with the agency. So.
I wish I was on the take with the agency.
No, you don't. No, you don't. Intelligence doesn't run deep in the intelligence industry. I'll tell you that. Anyway, sorry, but I hate to derail us, but
no, it was good. I think that it's always delightful to hear another.
You got to hold on to that. It was good until we go into this next topic.
Yeah. So actually, before we get into the next topic, let's take another topic in hand. So we're obviously talking about a firearm today, in detail and going into all the history of that. I think that we would be not doing anybody any favors if we didn't at least talk about the elephant in the room, if you will, of the current discussion around gun control and some of the other stuff going on right now in this country, talking about guns. So
go ahead, Andrew. What's your view on it, man? Be honest. Be honest. And stand on it. Stand by it.
No, if I'm 100% honest, and I think that people who know me would know this, I believe that there is room in the conversation for expanding background checks and some of the actually common sense gun control legislation out there.
I'll back you up, buddy, but don't use buzzwords that come from the standard line. Don't use common sense and shit like that.
Fair enough.
It's not. It's not common sense. It's actually good ideas.
Yes.
And that's where we're going to agree, is that we have cars in this country. Cars are not designed to kill people. Cars are designed to move people from point A to point B.
Yes.
To operate a car, you have to have a license. Nobody's out there complaining about their right to drive because they have to be licensed to do it. Mm-hmm. Yet everyone's out there complaining about their right to own a thing that's entire purpose is to take lives, and they want to complain about us doing background. No one's taking guns away. They're too a part of American culture.
Yep.
But I swear to God, nobody in this country needs anything other than a rifle or a pistol at the standard level. You do not need a semi-automatic friggin' machine gun in your hand. I'm not saying that carbines are machine guns. They're not. They're rifles. I'm not going to argue that point. But I will argue the point that the NRA is our own worst enemy as far as gun owners are concerned. Yes. They're hardlining. It makes them completely look like they just don't want to hear it. And that's exactly what we rail against with the left when we're talking about right and left stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. Oh, the left doesn't want to hear it. They don't want a hardline. It's the same crap. I'm sorry, if you're not going to treat the underlying problems with mental health illnesses and problems in this culture with people thinking they can just shoot up schools, if you're not going to treat them right, then you've got to treat the number one cause of people dying, which right now is people walking into schools with guns. If you're not going to do it the right way, then they're going to have to take away guns for a little while. And not take them away, but do something more, because for God's sakes, man, morons can own guns.
Yeah. No, and the middle can't hold here. I mean, I do not believe that we're gonna be successful in maintaining our rights as gun owners, as Americans, if we're not willing to give a little ground. And I think that
there's no compromise between either side, and I hold both sides responsible.
Yes, and you know what? It's blood on everybody's hands by not being willing to engage in productive conversations. And, I don't think that weakens either of our positions as gun owners, as people who like to shoot, as people who enjoy, firearms from a historical standpoint, and from for me, this is something I do on the weekends for enjoyment and to, practice.
I'm a stone holder of the Second Amendment. I believe in it. Yep. But I also believe that we have to do something, because it doesn't make sense. You have the right to vote in this country, right? But you have to register to do it. You have the right to drive a car, but you have to be licensed. There are things in this country that their purpose isn't to take lives. A gun, although it's a tool, its job is to kill things. Mm-hmm. Yet we want to argue that we shouldn't have to explain ourselves. I want people who are responsible having guns. I don't want people who are irresponsible having them, because then this is where we get to. So I'm all for the common sense. There's the buzzwords. It's not common sense. It's good ideas.
Basic, simple, straightforward.
Having said that, if they take a step beyond that and try to collect up people's guns like 1935 Germany, I swear to God, you'll see me flip a switch and be right there with the NRA.
Yep. Yeah.
You can't let the NRA be right if you're the left.
Yes.
You cannot let the people who are anti-gun all the way hold the platform. Get those kids up. First of all, the reason why kids cannot vote and the reason why people can't drink till they're 21 is because until you're 22, your frontal lobe is not fully developed, which means you don't make good decisions. Why are there teenagers running the anti-gun protests? Every time I see those kids get up there, the only thing I can think of is these kids are probably going to get drunk and smoke weed and not show up somewhere on time and probably fail half their classes. Yet these guys are the ones who are telling us what we should and shouldn't do with gun safety and gun. I mean, it's moronic. Everyone should be embarrassed in the government that these teenagers have taken up the mantle of the talk, because there's them and guys like me. And I'm not going to talk to them because they're morons. They're teenagers.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me at least, I understand that point of view that teenagers are by and large morons, but I think it speaks to a larger failing in our society that the adults in the room can't have a productive conversation without screaming, "You're here to take our guns," or
right.
You know,
or get rid of all guns. Guns have no place in society.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Society exists on the back of violence, and that means guns. Wars have created the United States. It's a hard, ugly fact. We won our freedom from by picking up arms against the British.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you try to talk smack about it, sorry, there were machine guns back then. The same kind of rapid fire guns that exist now existed then. We just have better ones nowadays. So there's no difference. The Second Amendment is not about hunting.
Nope.
It is about anti-tyrannical control of the people. That's it. It's meant so that we can rise up, not so we can go hunting deer.
Although that is one of the nice offshoots of it.
Well, that's also a base of it, but the whole it's not written to protect hunters. It's written to protect the people.
No, that's correct. That's correct.
Same people that are out complaining about the cops being too hard on everyone are the same ones that want to get rid of guns. Now, if I thought the cops were out to get me, I'd want a gun. I don't understand the whole mix-up in their thought process. However, again, like I said, it's hard for me because I do agree that we have to do something if we're not – and that's all if we're not going to address what the underlying problem is.
Yep.
And apparently we're not. Yep. Apparently we're not going to, so –
no, because that would be far too logical and yield positive results out of the government.
I never blame being fat. People never blame the spoon for being fat.
Nope. I just blame my innate laziness.
No, I mean like obese people.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to get rid of spoons because obese people die.
Yeah.
That's the same thing as getting rid of guns because people shoot up schools. It's the cause of the behavior that we need to treat, not the guns. But I mean, let's talk about guns so that people don't think I hate them.
We don't want Jeff to lose his friends.
Well, I've got more guns than I feel comfortable having, and I'm not getting rid of any of them, government. Just letting you know. Cold, dead hands.
You and Chuck.
If you want anyone to blame, government, you can blame yourself. You made me.
It's true.
It is true.
So let's go back in time, Jeff. Not to the beginning of this conversation because that would be too easy. But let's go back in time to kind of where the U.S. military was coming from when they started searching for the rifle that would become the M1.
So we're talking about the space of time between World War I and World War II.
Let's go back to like...
Give me a date, buddy.
1888.
Jesus Christ, you mean that? Okay.
Yeah, semi-automatic weapons have been around that long.
I'm going back. I'm there.
Yeah. Okay.
We're in the DeLorean.
I'm looking
for Doc Brown. I'm looking for Doc Brown, and I find the train, and all the people in the Old West.
So
over there's a pissed off Confederate guy. But all right. So what are we looking for now? Here back in 1880.
They lost the war. So you want to start off talking about our friend Hiram Maxim?
We're gonna do that. We're gonna go all the way back to 1888. That was actually the year that Hiram Maxim, that's actually the guy's name, guys, first created the self-reciprocating, that is to say, semi-automatic firearm. 1888 is the patent year. So he could have created it years before that. Oh no, he got the patent in 1888, so that's what we're saying. You'll remember that we talked about Hiram when we talked about the 1911 and John Moses Browning. Hiram knew John Moses Browning. I mean, they were contemporaries. But in 1888, despite what you hear on social and news media these days, there's a big difference between a semi and fully automatic weapon. And I know we just got done, going over this political implications of weapons, but this is important, guys, because this is something that I think people don't realize. Semi-automatic means you pull the trigger one time, one round gets fired. Okay? That's it. That's all it means. I mean, technically, I understand the thought process that people can have rapid fire weapons, but being able to pull your finger fast is not what makes a rapid fire weapon. Or if you really want to break it down, that's the only thing. So now you've got to tell people to stop pulling triggers fast, because that's the only way you're going to stop it. Because semi-automatic weapons exist even in the guns that are acceptable by the people that want to get rid of guns.
Yep.
So they don't understand that, and I want you as the listeners to understand that automatic weapons are the ones that people don't want around. Semi-automatic weapons have been around since 1888. That's damn near just 100 years since the time we started this country.
Yeah, not far off.
So anyway, so that's it. Hiram, self-reciprocating, semi-automatic. Hiram Maxim creates this thing. U.S. Army was also implementing some lessons learned from World War I by the end of the war. So this is why I said something about World War I, is because I knew that this is when the Army started looking into getting this weapon. By the end of World War I, here's the thing that confused me about World War I, since we're talking about the history of it.
Yeah.
It was the war to end all wars. And there was a massive drawdown in military power. Yet in this time period, we actually designed and got into the U.S. arsenal the weapon that very well may have won World War II. Okay, during the First World War, the U.S. had seen how semi-automatic rifles could be used in combat. I say seen because the U.S., it's a misunderstanding that we fought at great lengths in World War I. We really didn't. We were there for like the end. We fought a little bit. It was very much a European war, and we were very much like helpers. Mm-hmm. We weren't out there, but we got to see what these new kinds of, World War I was the modern warfare, the great technology boom that, warfare technology boom. So the U.S. saw this and said, we need to have something like that because people around the world are going to be getting these semi-automatic weapons. They figured that the 1903 Springfield bolt-action rifle was not right for sustained combat operations, and they're right. In walks the ability for us to go looking for a semi-automatic weapon, a self-reciprocating weapon, which just so happened to be designed by Hiram Maxim out in Utah.
And, this is coming from the doctrine of the time. So what they were realizing was that laying down a base of fire with a bolt action was good, but when you close with the enemy, having to actuate that bolt put you at a disadvantage in a world where there are machine guns, true machine guns, and other individuals using semi-automatic weapons.
Right.
So this is where a French-Canadian engineer who actually immigrated to the United States enters the scene. This is the eponymous John C. Garand. He was one of 12 children, 6 boys and 6 girls, who was born on a farm in Saint Remy in Quebec. I hate giving anything to Quebec, but I'll let them claim him.
Ah, vous, je suis son italien. I speak French. What's the matter? You don't like French people?
I don't like the Habs, so
The Habs? What's a Hab? Did you just drop a derogatory term?
No.
What's a Hab?
The Montreal Canadiens.
Is that what they're called?
Yeah, the Habs.
By your clan member friends? Because I never heard that term.
I don't know.
Before.
I mean, if you extend,
I just heard Canucks
too.
I didn't. Yeah. So he was French Canadian, French speaking Canadian.
Yep, French Canadian.
Okay.
His family moved to Jewett City, Connecticut, with the children. Actually, in somewhat sad circumstances, his father took them all to the United States after their mother died in 1899. So 11 years after Maxim came up with the self-reciprocating rifle that he patented.
Semi-automatic.
Yep. He and his siblings, like a lot of folks at the time, ended up having to work at a very young age to make ends meet. So they took employment in a textile mill. And that's where John learned to speak English while sweeping the floors of the mill. Still
treated better than the Irish.
But most people were. John became interested in working on guns, and he ended up learning to shoot after working at a shooting gallery in Connecticut, indoors, kind of the gallery style rifle. He learned machinist
like them old school ones you see with the little circular thing spinning and people are in there shooting. Was it that kind of gallery, or was it like a shooting range indoors?
It was a shooting range indoors, so they used downloaded standard cartridges. They had spinners, but they also had targets. So it was kind of a hybrid of the two things.
Okay.
Which were common at the time. Parlor rifles and the like were used a lot.
So it was like for professional shooters. It wasn't like the thing at Coney Island where you go in and shoot at, right?
Correct. It was for people who were serious.
Okay.
About marksmanship. And this is where we see his career in a textile mill, learning about machines and how to work on machines, and his passions start to come together. So you see him learn to shoot and learn about guns after work and during the hours he put in when he was a little bit older, learning machinist skills in the textile mill. He was eventually hired by a company called Brown and Sharp in Providence, Rhode Island, who made tools. That's what they did day in and day out. He was hired by them in 1909. He later found employment with another firm in 1916, and it's during this period that he resumed rifle practice at the shooting galleries that were along Broadway and finally became a U.S. citizen in 1920. So this is 21 years after he first came to the United States.
And guys, that's not easy. Naturalized American citizens don't get it. They know more about U.S. history than most U.S. citizens born do.
And I can certainly say that, in a lot of categories, that's probably true of me too. Like I think that one of the, and this is the digression, but I think one of the great areas where the public education system comes up short, and there are many, is not teaching civics anymore. I think it leaves a lot to be desired, and it leaves a lot of folks not knowing very much about their country. So
I agree. So Garand's focus for machinery and target shooting blended naturally into the hobby of designing guns. I mean, so he was in there learning about machinists, and he worked at a textile factory, but he pretty much learned how to use those metal machining tools that were in there, and that's where he got into the whole. He wanted to be a gunsmith, so he knew where to go and learn the stuff, and he built himself up a steady education and got himself pretty good at it. So in 1917, the United States Army took on bids to design a new light machine gun to replace the going out of style one from World War I. And Garand's design was eventually selected by the War Department. Now, we know from the 1911 episode that the U.S. military doesn't just pick one weapon. They have like trials, and that's actually a really smart move to do. So he was selected to be one of the trial weapons. Garand was appointed a position in the United States Bureau of Standards in Washington, D.C. with the task of perfecting the weapon. So they've also brought him in, just like they did with Browning, to work on the weapon as it was going through. So the first model of his weapon, of his design, was not built until 1919. Too late for use in World War I, but the government kept employing Garand as an engineer in the Springfield Armory from November 4th, 1919 until he retired in 1953. So it's kind of interesting. He's being hired to replace the Springfield, and he's working in the Springfield factory doing it. I'm sure that went over well. The model, the M1922, wasn't received positively by the board, so he redesigned it to fire a lighter round, .276 instead of 30-06, and resubmitted. He also put forward a 30 caliber M1, but withdrew it, improved it, and resubmitted it for testing. Successful this time, and that's whatever their standards were. I don't know what their standards were. Andrew, do you have any? It's probably something like has to hit a target.
Fire something like 1,000 rounds.
I know
major rebuild.
You can almost guarantee there's so many rounds fired without a malfunction.
Yep.
That malfunctions have to be easily and readily repairable. Those are ones you can guarantee. But yep. I wonder how they judge whether or not because you heard them say, you said earlier that the Springfield was too powerful.
Too powerful for the ranges that they were engaging.
Okay. So Garand was up against one other rifle, the Peterson. And that's spelled with a D, but it's pronounced like the T. In trials, it handily defeated it. The Peterson was no match for the Garand. The U.S. Army forces probably would have marched into combat with the M1 Garand chambered in .276, except for the intervention of one guy, the other really popular general.
We're just hitting both of them in this one episode.
Douglas. Actually, I got no problem with Douglas MacArthur until he tried to, blow off the president. But Douglas Smith MacArthur. MacArthur was serving as the Army Chief of Staff at the time. Felt strongly that dropping to a .276 was the wrong direction and ordered the resources to be put into improving the 30-06. So he kind of pushed them back towards the Springfield size round, even though they were trying to go away from it. And that's actually, I agree with MacArthur. It should have been done that way, especially with the war that was coming up. It's almost like he could see the future. So on August 3rd, 1933, Garand's rifle was redesignated semi-automatic rifle caliber 30 M1, and on May of the following year, 75 of the new rifles were issued for testing. Though numerous problems were reported with the new weapon, as they do with all new weapons, guys, Garand was able to correct them, and the rifle was able to be standardized on July 9th, 1936, with the first production model clearing on July 21st, 1937, just in time for WW2.
Yep. So, all that said, in terms of history, there's a few things here that I think make the M1 special. A bunch of things, actually. I think one was a question of timing. It was the first semi-automatic rifle adopted as "quote unquote" standard issue in the world. Every other global power was issuing bolt-action rifles as standard well into World War II, and in some cases beyond.
Yeah, the Enfield was still being issued out to the British for a long time, and even the Canadians. And this guy was Canadian.
Yep. I mean, the Enfield is a great example of a bolt-action rifle that stood the test of time. The Springfield, the 1903 is definitely one too, but the short action bolt on the Enfield just lent itself to rapid, accurate fire in a way that no other rifle really did up until we started seeing the introduction of these true combat rifles, these main
It
battle
just had
rifles.
a really heavy round. The 303 was a heavy round.
Heavy round, moving pretty quick. Just, knock people off their feet, which, is really what you want when you're, engaging at, 200, 300, 400 yards.
Yeah. And it's a lasting weapon. I mean, I was engaged with it in Afghanistan from enemy. Yeah. Engaging with Enfield weapons. So unsuccessfully, obviously. They did engage us with it.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, and that's, it speaks of the quality of both the chambering and the rifle itself.
It's times being M1. What they were, we had to find a new rapid fire, lighter.
Yep.
And a lower velocity round. So I mean, it makes sense. MacArthur was right too, going back to 30-06, because just because you're not engaging people at certain distances doesn't mean you don't need to have the ability to. And so I have to agree with MacArthur on this. That going back to the 30-06 was a good idea, even though it did slow down production.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that we have with the M1, and Jeff, maybe you can help explain this a little bit better than I can, is the long stroke piston. Basically, how they actuated the action. The Army Ordnance Corps had a concern that a vented barrel would have a reduced service life, so venting the hot gases out of the barrel back into the chamber to work the bolt, there was some concern that it would shorten the service life. It would degrade the parts too quickly because those hot gases, especially with the primers of the time and the powder of the time, were highly corrosive. This is what you see in a lot of Russian rifles from the period, where you have corrosion on the neck and in the lands and grooves of the barrel, decreasing the accuracy.
Yeah, it was called what's called dirty rounds, and the dirty type, it wasn't really clean type gunpowder, smokeless powder that was used. Now, with the long stroke gas tube, you have to have that in that rifle because you have the barrel so long. Mm-hmm. So they're not wrong with concerns about that. I do disagree with the vented barrel being, as nowadays you just put a compensator on the end and you got a vent, but I do see where their issue came from, but you also have to take into account the fact that these guys were making adjustments on a weapon system that was brand new to them, that they had no idea how to operate. It's not like when the M4 came around after having years of the A1. They didn't know what was going to work and what wasn't with this weapon. All they knew is what guys like Garand and Hiram Maxim and John Browning told them. Mm-hmm. And obviously they didn't take them at face value because they did have concerns about it. But I think them working around, the big issue I think was more the loading and the unloading of the weapon. I think the gas issue was more of a technician's issue. Mm-hmm. Wasn't really what MacArthur wasn't worried about that. MacArthur really did get hyper focused on that 8-round end block clip and all that kind of stuff, and with good reason. But I mean, I can go into can go into long talk about whether long stroke gas tubes are better. They're not. We both know it now that they're not, but they were necessary for the type of weapon systems they had because they didn't have the shorter barrels and the heavier type metal that was withstand that kind of stuff. So I would say that it's funny to look back in it because you can Monday morning quarterback these guys, but you have to understand they didn't know. They had no frame of reference. Yeah. They made statements and worried about things that weren't important, that now we look at it and we're like, why were they worried about that? Why were they this, that, and the other thing? But they didn't know.
They were blazing new trails. They were cutting new paths. So
right. And they were watching, and the military was not dumb. They were seeing what was going on in Europe and that we were getting ready to go back to war again. So you can imagine the Joint Chiefs and everyone being really worried about getting ourselves outfitted with something that was going to be reliable in the face of the oncoming Nazi threat.
And they didn't want to get stuck with something surplus from the French like the Chouchot that, had great provenance in, clean laboratory settings, but once you
Mhm.
start introducing mud and muck and trenches and it getting banged around, just flat out didn't function as it was supposed
Well,
to.
they're not designed to be fired. They're designed to be dropped.
Yep.
They are French-made weapons.
They only get dropped once, though.
That's it. Never fired. Only dropped once.
And that's actually a good pivot point to one of the other things that I think made the M1 special was that it was built like a tank and has nowadays a reputation for reliability. But that wasn't always the case. When it was first introduced, as Jeff was saying before, the M1 was plagued by production problems, which delayed initial deliveries until late in 1937. Springfield was able to build about 100 per day 2 short years later, but production ended up being pretty slow due to changes in the rifle's barrel and gas cylinder, as we just discussed before.
Well, let's be honest, too. Do you think Springfield was really going out of their way to help this weapon that was going to take over their weapon? You know, they were only doing it because they had to.
Well, I mean, let's make an important differentiation here. Springfield, the Armory in Springfield, Massachusetts, and Springfield, the modern day gun company, are completely separate institutions.
But not at the time.
Well, correct. At the time, Springfield was the main armory for the United States of America.
And also the company.
And yes, yeah. And
so
now
at the time, there was no different. And they were not separated. They were
correct.
The same. So,
but they were still they were still kind of getting a piece of the action in terms of production. Now the M1 didn't have their name associated with it, but they were still the main production point. So they were reaping the benefits of producing the new gun, even though they lost maybe the prestige of having the main battle rifle of the Army.
Well, let's say what it really is. They weren't the sole rights owners of that weapon
Correct.
system. Garand was. I mean, they had a good run with being Browning's owner of all his stuff.
Yep.
They bought Browning's, Browning didn't own his designs. Springfield did.
Correct.
This was different. Yeah, so it was just
different.
a money thing. I just think it was. I think there's probably more behind the whole slow process to put stuff out because they sure as hell did pick up the pace once the war kicked off, didn't they?
Yeah. Yep. They sure did. Got to 600 rifles per day at one point. And then, obviously they couldn't keep up with production, so they had to franchise it out. So you see M1s being produced by typewriter companies. And the Smith Corona M1s are super sought after by collectors these days.
Toy companies made weapons.
Yep. Everybody. I mean, it was total war on both sides of the coin. That notwithstanding, the U.S. Army ended up being fully equipped and fully issued with M1s by the end of 1941. So going into 1942, when we start actually engaging in a little bit more aggressive combat on a wider scale, the entire U.S. Army is equipped with them. The Marines, being Marines, were a little bit slower taking it over. They had very strong doctrine and very strong fondness for the 1903 Springfield, to the point where maybe the Marines on the ground were more accepting of the M1, but the brass was a little bit less willing to fully embrace it. Whether it was fear of trying new things or a real belief in the doctrine of the Marine Corps at the time. They didn't.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I think that I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Is that cat bothering you, or is it me interrupting you?
No, cat.
What interests me about about World War II is the fact that the Garand was the official weapon of the United States Army, but God, there were so many different weapons that were issued out. Mm-hmm. And so when you say things like, hey, they had fully outfitted, it's not. I don't think it was fully outfitted at the level that it was during the invasion. And that's not saying that they didn't have it. I'm just saying it's funny how 2,000 maybe or two maybe infantry divisions being outfitted is different from like a full wartime army, which is probably why you saw so many different weapon systems being brought in.
Floated. I mean, if you look at, submachine guns of the Second World War, how many did the U.S. issue before it was over?
Oh, like six different.
Six. I was going to say half dozen.
Yeah, from the grease gun all the way to the MP5. Yeah. Or the precursor to the MP5. So.
Yeah. And then the captured MP40s and the rest. They definitely they tried a little bit of everything.
They did the BAR, the BAR, but that was I mean it was just a very unclear time. Like the one thing I think a lot of people should take from this episode is the fact that there was an official weapon of the United States military during World War II, and it wasn't what you think it was. It was the Garand.
Yep.
So
yeah, and I think that shows like Band of Brothers, which obviously you just did a whole miniseries on, and movies like Saving Private Ryan or The Big Red One have brought the M1 into the mainstream, quote unquote, brought it more front of mind when you're talking about World War II. Maybe you want to talk about the way that the M1 was loaded and the sound that came along with that.
You mean the very notable metal clink at the end when they ran out of ammo?
Yes.
That was designed in there to let the shooter know that he had run out of ammo.
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of people hear that, and it's something everyone has heard in every single World War II movie. The loading it from the top with the stripper clip and the block down and that metal hit and then seeing the clip fly out. That was all real. Although you could load it from the bottom. You could. But it was not designed that way, and most guys just loaded over the top with 8 rounds.
8 rounds.
8 rounds.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think the BAR had what?
20 round.
20 round clips, but you can load it from the top. The BAR could be loaded from the top with, it could hold 6 rounds in its internal mag.
Yeah.
So it was a better weapon. The Garand is what I would have wanted to carry.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that knockdown power is something of a miss, right? Stopping power, but 30-06 moving really fast, it's going to give the person on the receiving end of it a pretty bad day.
I'm here to tell you that 7.6 or 5.56. No, someone who gets shot with 5.56 doesn't know they've been shot. They don't know they're dead.
Yep.
I'm telling you, they'll run for a while if they're running.
And actually, talking about the M1 with the M block clips and the ping that you hear, a lot of people will tell you that Germans would wait until they could hear 8 rounds blast off and wait for the ping, and U.S. soldiers were trying to replicate the sound and all of that. That's absolute horseshit. I can't.
That's a movie. That's Hollywood.
That's Hollywood, bro. If you listen to, if you don't believe us, go to YouTube and type in Bloke on the Range and look up he does a whole line of experiments trying to replicate the myth, Mythbuster style.
Well, you could debunk it just by the thought process of who the hell would come up with that in a combat environment. The Germans weren't trying to time the gunshot fire.
Yep.
It was mass confusion on the battlefield. They're just trying to assault and shoot and move forward. And it's a waste of time with modern shooting techniques through the military. You don't all shoot at the same time. One guy shoots till he runs out, and then someone else does. So it would be irrelevant, or it would be erroneous for the Germans to have come up with that plan. I give them more credit as soldiers than that.
Yeah, and I mean they were fighting with bolt action rifles, so they were busy actuating the bolt, not paying attention to whether or not a indistinct ping was coming over the sound of grenades and artillery fire and small arms fire. So there's a free tidbit for you guys to
I'm sure that there's some kind of going back to the Germans talking about that sound.
Yep.
Was with them thinking they were trying to do something about it, but they were just talking about it because it was a notable sound on the battlefield.
Yep.
Just like getting shot at by an AK is a notable sound to someone who's being shot at.
Yep. It's I think the AK is a little bit harder to miss than the not very loud ping, though. I mean,
it's definitely noticeable when it's getting shot at you.
Yeah,
that's one thing that the film industry got right.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us to the next phase of weapon development in the U.S. Army. It's the M1 served all the way through the war with the problems and solutions that we had. Actually, the M1 remained officially the official principal service rifle of the Army until the M14 was introduced in 1957. So it served in all of World War II, or all of American involvement in World War II for the most part, and all of the war in Korea and all of our kind of police actions in the years immediately following that.
Up into, and I think it went even a little bit past 57.
Yes.
Like it was officially still in the system for a long time.
That's correct. It was until 65, actually, 1965, that the changeover from the M1 was fully completed. We actually, the changeover took longer than the full service life of the M14 as the official principal service rifle of the U.S. Army, because we obviously by 65 we were starting to replace them with M16 A1s, which is its own
That's its own problem.
Own problem. But just because we weren't using them doesn't mean that the M1 wasn't in use outside of the United States.
Oh, no, not at all.
Not at all. Surplus rifles were given to nations such as Germany, Italy, Japan to help them rebuild their militaries.
Here you go, guys. Here's the weapon that friggin' overthrew your Axis powers.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Yep. Congratulations. Learn from the victors.
I think this one actually killed 10 Germans. Here you go.
Here you go. Though, it was officially retired from combat use in the U.S., it's still actually a popular weapon, both with drill teams and civilian collectors. There's a program called the Civilian Marksmanship Program that sells hundreds of thousands of Garands as surplus. If you're lucky enough to click on the website and figure out when they're actually for sale. We actually Jeff, do you want to, before we do that, the U.S. actually just repatriated several tens of thousands of M1s, so I'm going to be looking to get my hands on one. It's one of my dream guns. So you're telling me this so you need me to help you try to get your hands on one of them? Oh no, I can do it. I'm a club member. I know the secret handshake and everything, but if you know somebody who's selling one for less than $800, I'd be delighted to have a conversation with them. Yeah, they're $800. You want one for less than $800? Yeah, I do. Give me it till tomorrow. All right, cool. Thank you. Jesus Christ, you should have told me that. Like, you shouldn't have to wait. Well, I wanted to live in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, dude. There's Garands like pouring out the woodwork around here. Great. Perfect. I'll take one. I'll get you one. Good. Do you want to do the interesting footnote about him, about his royalties? Yep. Yeah. So Garand, I mean, talk about being a real patriot. I mean, this guy comes over from Canada. He works and learns in America. He works his ass off to become a naturalized citizen. He creates this weapon system, which has made the most powerful assistance to us winning World War II. And he never accepted royalties for the work. Instead, he gifted the gun's design to his adoptive homeland of the United States. He gave the money back. Congress tried to grant him a $100,000 reward of gratitude, but he never picked it up. They actually put it out there, and he just never signed for it. He did not want to, and it wasn't a thing about him not wanting to be associated with the weapon. Nope. It really was just this was his gift to his adopted country. Yeah, all he ever did was draw a salary from the U.S. government. He took his salary home every day, and that was all the compensation he felt he needed. And because of that is probably why they were able to make so many Garands. Because there was no royalties being paid to anyone for them. Yeah, I think it's a great kind of footnote and good way to kind of wind this podcast down. For love of country. Merci beaucoup, Garand. Merci beaucoup. That what you just said in French, absolutely. That goes ditto for me too. Ditto? Ditto. Nice. God. So Jeff, thank you as always. We were talking before the show about having you back on to talk about another couple of topics. So folks out there can absolutely. I'm annoyed by myself this episode. You may not want me back on. Yeah, no. I'm just kidding. You're delightful. You're delightful. You're impulsive. No, I'm not delightful. Don't feed me a line. I'm not delightful. I'm an acquired taste. I'm not delightful though. But you know what? So is blue cheese. You're the blue cheese. Did you just compare me to blue cheese? I did. I'm going to change my ways. I'm going to change my hedonist ways. See, there you go. I'm helping out all over the place. Jeff, if people for some reason wanted to hear more of you, where could they go? Oh my God, that was awesome. Well done. If where they go, thanks, man. You can go check me out at Changing Hearts and Minds, which is on the network, which is the day before this show, Wednesday or Fridays or Sundays. Apparently, I release all over the place now. But you can also go find me by searching at Jeff Adamec or at Jeffrey Adamec in Twitter or Facebook and find me on there. And you can hear Andrew and me do much better shows where I'm not being irritable on other history shows that we've got. So believe me, I'm not aware of my irritability tonight and my on fireness, but it has nothing to do with Andrew or this show. It has to do with. It has to do with other things. I'll bleep that out. Don't worry. I got you. I got you. Good Lord. That's why I don't talk about my work on here too much. 'Cause,
It probably was a bad idea to start me off fired up about the gun stuff in America. We should have ended with that
yeah.
because it put me in a mood. But no, it's I want to thank you, man. I didn't know a lot of this stuff
Yeah.
about the Garand so I had to go research and look it up, and I learned a lot of stuff from this that I didn't know.
Yeah.
I
No,
have a different view of this Garand guy now than I did before.
yeah, absolutely. I think that stinger that we put in there at the end, I really, really was impressed. I assumed that he took a licensing deal like everybody else and, you know, made buku bucks out of that.
And it wasn't just show, because apparently the $100,000 is still out there in the budgeting offices waiting to be picked up.
That's awesome. I love that. That's awesome.
That's something I looked up after. It is still out there. There's $100,000 unaccounted for by the Garand family, and they will not pick it up.
That's awesome. That, you know what? And I think that's a hopeful note to end this podcast on. Hey everyone, it's Andrew from Neophyte in the Woods. Just popping in real quick, wanting to do a quick kind of bumper out here. We here at Neophyte in the Woods and the Change Your POV Network do this all out of the goodness of our hearts. We legitimately love and are passionate about the subjects about which we speak. However, that doesn't mean that we're not absorbing some costs. And one of the ways we're trying to address the overhead costs associated with putting out these podcasts is to do Patreon. And you can find a link to it right down at the bottom in the kind of the episode show notes on our website. If you could donate anything that you're able to support us and help us get this content coming out to you, it would be very much appreciated. There are tiers of membership from $1 all the way up to $10, and you can donate more than that. For our backers, our Patreon patrons, we do offer some unique content. We've been doing weekly shows where we do a live stream and we talk about a quote on Mondays. It's normally right around 8 p.m. Eastern. There's also some other cool rewards, including the level at which I back at $10 a month. You can actually get, believe it or not, a signed autographed picture of our fearless leaders, Bennett and Eddie. It really changed my life. It sits actually right up above the computer where I record all this stuff. I take it with me when I go hunting. I take it with me when I go fishing. I take it with me when I go to work. It goes everywhere with me. Some people have an EDC pocket knife. I have an EDC picture of Ben and Eddie. I would really strongly suggest you back us and keep the good work that we're doing coming. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon. Thanks for leaving us reviews on iTunes. And we'll talk to you next week.